Senator Youssef.
Thank you, Speaker. Honourable colleagues, I rise today, of course, to speak to Bill C-228, the Pension Protection Act. This is a day, I think, that many pensioners, advocates, workers, union activists who have worked tirelessly and selflessly for decades to make a reality. Today is about them and their efforts in achieving something historic for workers and pensioners. Colleagues, you can play an integral role in writing an end to this story by supporting this legislation today without amendment. When people ask me what C-228 is about, my answer is simple. It's about fairness, respect for workers' contribution, and a commitment to their employers, and about their right for all of us to enjoy a dignified retirement. Senators, I would like to first recognize and thank Senator Wells for sponsoring the bill. He was a great colleague to work with. And of course, my colleagues in the Senate Banking Committee for the incredible good work we did, Senator Wallen for chairing our committee, but equally all members of the committee for the very, very important work we did in bringing the bill forward back to the Senate. I believe the committee members understand the inherent injustice that pensioners have endured because of our current bankruptcy laws across this country. I know that although this may not be a perfect solution, it is, of course, the best solution available to us right now to protect retirement futures of workers and pensioners. Colleagues and critics of the bill base their argument in the potential unintended consequence should it become law. They say the bill might make it harder to access capital, or it might increase the borrowing cost, or it could lead to fewer defined benefit plans. Could, may, or might. These are the words that have little value compared to the certainties of what current bankruptcy laws have cost workers and pensioners whose companies have gone bankrupt with a pension deficit. Our current laws place, of course, these workers in dignity and respect for their lifetime of work at the back of the line. Colleagues, it is these known inherent and harmful consequences of our bankruptcy laws that I ask you to fix for the benefit of workers who, in good faith with their employer, agree to deferred wages today for a more secure retirement tomorrow. Senator, you may ask what makes defined benefit plan so special that they deserve a super priority in bankruptcy if there is a deficit. Well, it depends on how much you value the trust and the importance of keeping promise when it comes to a company's most important assets, its workers. Employer-sponsored defined benefit plans are part of the collective bargaining and employment agreement process. They are negotiated and agreed in the same way as wages. Workers will often agree to lower their wages today, preferring, of course, that the money go into a pension plan to provide them for a more secure retirement tomorrow. In essence, a deferred wage. This agreement and negotiated agreement is based on a promise by their employer to make the necessary contribution to their employee's pension plan, and the trust by those employees in the employer to do so. Workers' retirement futures are premised on the promise being kept and the trust being respected. For most employer-sponsored pension plan, the promise is kept and the trust is proven to be well placed. However, for some plans, the employer has broken their promise and betrayed the trust that was placed in them. We know their names: Nortel, Sears, Eaton, Massey Ferguson, Cliff Natural Resources, and many more. The consequence of this can be devastating for the pensioners and their family who work a lifetime on the belief that the promise will be kept and the trust be respected. I want to take a moment to talk about what it means for pensioners when the promise is broken and the trust is shattered by sharing some of the stories of pensioners who have been affected by the unintended consequence of our current bankruptcy law. Ron, Audrey, and Attilo are three of over 1,600 former Sears employees who had to deal with the reality that their pension would be cut by almost 15%. Here are experts from the Sears Canada Retirees Association submission on this bill. Ron from Montpearl, Newfoundland. It is terrible, said Ron. Worked for Sears for 35 years. I stayed awake at night thinking about it. I don't know what to do, said the 77-year-old former appliance salesman. Ron had to return to work to supplement the loss in his pension benefit. Audrey of Beaver Dam, New Brunswick, she worked for 50 years for Sears and stayed until the last day the store was open. She just could not believe that the pension she paid into was promised for her lifetime of work could now drop by 20%. It's just not fair, she said. Tilo from Alberta. Tilo had to consider returning to work in sales to make up for the lost income, something he was not looking forward to do. Who the hell is going to hire a 73-year-old guy, he said. I can only stay on my feet for so many hours. I have arthritis. Tilo worked for Sears for 44 years. From the United Steelworkers brief, who spoke about the 1,700 pensioners at Cliff Natural Resources that went bankrupt in 2015. From Rose, Laurie-Len, Cliff bankruptcy meant a loss of $400 a month. At our age, we can't say that we're going back to work. We have to live with what we have left, they explained. From Wright Birch pensioners faced 47% cut to their pension in December 2012. In the end, after making some gain, they must live with the rest of their lives with a 30% reduction or cut to their pension. All of them were affected in some way: health, family, recreation, etc. Many must now live below the poverty line, some going back to work at the age of 70 or older if they're healthy enough to do so. Colleague, this bill is about ensuring that there will be no more pensioners who have to suffer the same fate of the pension of the past bankruptcy. Senators, commercial creditors like banks and financial institutions are sophisticated lenders who can take steps to protect their investment against the risk of default. They can scrutinize their loans, transferring risk to the investor. They can expect companies to fully fund their pensions benefit plan and prudently manage the risk. And they can require increased disclosure about the funded status of their pension plan. Pensioners, however, are unable to protect their pension and benefits against the risk of default. They don't have multiple private pension plans and savings to make up the loss. And they have no power over their former employer to keep their pension fund fully funded. I would like to return to the issue of unintended consequence that I mentioned earlier, what we heard critics talk about so often. In particular, how this bill may affect the company's ability to access capital. Senator, I would argue this issue isn't whether a company may not have access to capital. The issue is about the consequence of the financial choices a company makes when there is a pension fund deficit. The only unintended consequence of this bill is that financial choices of a company makes will now include pension, of course, pensioners' interests. Some of the current bankruptcy laws purposely have unintended consequences not to consider. I believe, like many, that by changing the rules, companies will change their behavior. Do I believe that this change in behavior will encourage buy lenders who will be more vigilant in ensuring companies they lend to have healthy pension plan? Yes, I do. Will that mean companies would not be able to pay a dividend or purchase shares back before their deficit is addressed? Very likely. Colleagues, don't you think that this would be a good outcome if it means pensioners will be less likely to lose a significant portion of their retirement future? Before I conclude, I want to thank, of course, and recognize the many people who have made today possible. I first want to start with the parliamentarians who began proposing private members' bill and public bills going back over 15 years. Two of them was right here in this chamber in the past. Our current speaker, of course, is one of those people, and Senator Eggleton was one of those people who retired from the Senate. Their efforts and the path made easier by MP Marilyn Gladue, working with all parties in the other place to achieve this unanimous support for this bill. I also want to recognize the work of labour groups such as Unifor, the United Steelworkers, the Canadian Labour Congress, who never let the issue die on behalf of their members and pensioners. I also would like to thank the pensioners who have taken the time to call, to email, to write letters, not just only to me, but to every senator in this chamber. Many of those people will not benefit from C-228, but they nevertheless share their heartfelt stories of stress, struggle, and hard work with all of us. Finally, I want to especially recognize the pension advocates who tireless and selfless efforts in fighting for a fair future for pensioners across this country. I want to recognize and thank the groups like the Canadian Federation of Pensioners, Yellow Pages Pensioners Group, Air Canada Pioneers, CanAge, CARP, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, Réseau for the Q, and Kirk. The National Pensions Federation. They have fought not for their benefits, but for the benefit of the next generation of pensioners in this country. All of these people and groups are why this bill is before us here today. They are looking to us to take the final step to ensure a fair and dignified retirement for pensioners like themselves. In conclusion, colleagues, what we have before us is a bill that is about fixing an unjust law, and unjust bankruptcy laws that have kept people's dignity and respect for their lifetime of work far too long at the back of the line in bankruptcy they had no part in causing in the first place. Workers and pensioners should not be written off as expendable in insolvency proceedings, as has been in the case of Nortel, Sears, Massey Ferguson, White Birch, bankruptcy, and many other companies. Companies can fully fund their pension plan, but they chose not to, since current legislation allowed them to underfund their plan, with the unintended consequence that no one gets hurt except the workers and pensioners. Today, colleagues, we can right the wrong and restore fairness for workers and pensioners in our bankruptcy laws to ensure that their worth is placed in the front of the line, not in the back. The question, of course, you need to consider is, after a lifetime of hard work, should anybody have to struggle to make ends meet in their retirement because of an unjust law? Senators, I believe the answer is no, and I would urge you, of course, to support pensioners' right to a dignified retirement by adopting this bill. On a personal level, I've waited 30 years to give this speech, to think one day the law would finally change. I never expect to be in this chamber while it would happen. But I have to say, how we got here is not quite normal. I want to thank MP Marilyn Gladue for her openness to collaborate with me, because I contacted her and asked her about her bill. And she said, absolutely. And I said, I have some suggestions. Would you like to consider them? She said, okay. So we talked, we collaborated, and more importantly, of course, our openness to work with other parties in the other House to achieve these objectives. I can't begin to tell you how monumental a task that was, but to get people here. In closing, colleagues, there are many sad stories I can continue to tell you, but I know for the men and women who would have loved to be here tonight to join us in this discussion and witness this debate because of the timing of the bill, they're not here to. But I know for certain they will have a toast to thanking us for doing the right thing. I know you will join me and my colleagues and hopefully vote to support this bill as is without any amendment and truly create history for working people in this country. Thank you.